will you give the context before you?
I was gonna present.
Okay,
the
I'm sorry.
backstory, yeah.
I'm sorry.
So I think for those of y'all who are well versed in this, you already know some of this, but in a vacuum, I did think some backstory would be appropriate. So in June and July of this year, the city manager's annual performance review was in progress. And on June the 24th of this year, former councilperson Maddox circulated an email to mayor and council raising what she stated were, quote, serious concerns related to our city manager's involvement with our police department, the ongoing GBI investigation, and her yearly review. To address Maddox's email, the mayor called a special call meeting on July 7th. In reviewing the substance of that email and in my capacity as the city attorney, I found what I believed to be numerous misstatements of fact, opinions masquerading as fact, and dubious legal conclusions that I believed warranted correction in order for the city officials to properly weigh and consider Maddox's claims as pertaining to the city manager. I prepared a PowerPoint on my own accord to advise the city officials. Neither mayor nor council were aware in advance of its existence or of its contents. As Maddox's email has now been made public, council has voted, as you just heard, to remove the confidentiality protections afforded to the PowerPoint presentation. In the presentation, I highlight what I believe to be some of the more poignant allegations from Maddox's email, and then I compare and contrast those allegations to the claims within the evidence that is available. So I essentially took the email point by point as I thought was pertinent to the mayor and council's considerations. So point number one, and this is from Maddox's June 24th email. She stated that she believed it was inexcusable that the city manager refused to cooperate with Chief Worthman to disclose who had shown her an illegal photo of the expired tag that she had in her possession. I'm gonna first start with the allegation highlighted that the photo was illegal. As a threshold matter, the whole premise is based upon that illegality. There's been no legal determination that this is true. As everyone is aware, Sergeant New rather, was certainly charged with illegal dissemination of the tag information. As I noted in my March presentation to the council, OCGA 35-3-38A, which was the code section he was charged under, does not appear to include tag information within the definition of, quote, criminal history record information. And it further appears to be at least contradicted by the fact that Sergeant New was originally charged with a felony related to this dissemination, and that matter has recently now finally concluded through a pretrial diversion agreement that included $250 in court costs and found that his criminal case expressly was eligible for expungement. Regarding the second part of that email, it alleged that our city manager, quote, refused to cooperate with Chief Worthman. This allegation really seems to turn the chain of command structure based on the city charter and its ordinances on its head. The chief of police is a department head. The chief of police reports to the city manager. The city manager does not report to the chief of police. And here what happened is the city manager maintains what she refers to as an open door policy to have employees who believe something has gone awry in their department, something's going wrong, something is abnormal in their department, to report those things directly to her. This policy is citywide. It is not isolated to the JPD. It applies to all departments equally. The city manager will tell you that she receives dozens of reports from employees on a weekly basis. And that policy is in place so employees feel safe and secure that they can report issues of concern within their department to the city manager. And if they didn't feel that it was safe to make those reports, or if there was fear of negative repercussions as a result of those reports, those issues of concern would essentially go unreported. The Second point from Maddox's email, she argued that it was, quote, inexcusable that the city manager refused to cooperate with the GBI in disclosing the identity of the officer, and moreover, that the GBI had to get a warrant issued by Judge Prim to make her comply. Again, to break those down, she first alleges that Priscilla refused to cooperate with the GBI in disclosing the identity of the officer. The assertion that the city manager refused to cooperate with the GBI is, quite frankly, patently inaccurate and misleading. From the GBI report, this was an interview on February the 12th, 2025, and it notes that the GBI contacted Priscilla Murphy for the purpose of conducting an interview related to the dissemination of the tag information. In that meeting on February the 12th, the report expressly finds ultimately Murphy advised that she was going to cooperate and only wanted to tell the city attorney, me, that she intended to cooperate. Murphy ultimately disclosed that JPD Sergeant Lee New disclosed the GCIC information to her. Now, what is the real objection here? This does require some degree of speculation. However, I believe that the objection was that the city manager, under advice, legal advice from me as the city attorney, did not immediately disclose the name of the officer involved fast enough for former Councilwoman Maddox's liking. And to understand that, I think a review of the timeline of events is somewhat helpful on this. So the first GBI meeting was on February the 10th, 2025. It is somewhat noteworthy, this meeting was unscheduled and unannounced. The GBI essentially showed up at City Hall and requested an immediate meeting with the city manager. At that meeting, the city manager asked that I come to City Hall and I participate in that meeting, which I did. I advised the GBI that I needed an opportunity on February the 10th to research the law related to GCI information and whether employee reports of suspected wrongdoing were potentially protected information under whistleblower statutes or otherwise. Essentially, we had been caught cold on this, and we hadn't had an opportunity to educate ourselves yet on the law, and we requested time to do that. The very next morning, I called the GBI to follow up with them. That was a phone call made by me. From the GBI report, February 11th, although they were erroneously referred to me as the Jefferson city manager, it notes Rob Alexander contacted Special Agent Byer with information related to the current investigation. At all times, we were attempting to be cooperative with the GBI and provide them information provided that we believed that it was not protected or confidential in some way. The very next day, so the second contact by the GBI was February the 12th, when the GBI again showed up unannounced and without an appointment to the city manager's office. And this February 12th meeting was when Priscilla told the GBI that Sergeant New was the individual who had provided her the information. A grand total of 2 days passed between our first interaction with the GBI and the disclosure of that information. And I had initiated communications with the GBI in the interim in an attempt to assist with their investigations. The latter portion of this second point from Councilwoman Maddox, or former Councilwoman Maddox, asserts that the GBI, quote, had to, unquote, get a search warrant in order to obtain the city manager's compliance. Again, this is not true. The GBI report expressly references that the execution of the search warrant for Murphy's phone was not necessary, as she had disclosed, voluntarily I might add, who had given the information to her. Thus, the search warrant was returned back to the Superior Court, specifically Judge Sari Griffey, as unserved. I'll also note that at no point was Priscilla Murphy ever made aware or disclosed that there was a search warrant for her telephone, and she again disclosed that information without knowledge that there was a search warrant that had been executed, or that had been issued rather, but was never actually executed. Claim number 3 from the email, former Councilwoman Maddox claimed that Priscilla Murphy lied, quote unquote, in the GBI report. I did not address this point in my PowerPoint presentation on July the 7th because I believed that it was more appropriate for Priscilla to address that claim herself, which she did, which is beyond the scope of the PowerPoint presentation that has been released here today. Claim number 4. I need my glasses now. That is, we were told that Lee New had repeatedly, and I'm going to highlight the word repeatedly, followed the chain of command. So what this point pertains to is in his GBI interview, Sergeant New had indicated to the GBI that he had raised the issue previously with the chain of command that one of the other JPD officers had been caught on a flock camera hit driving with an expired tag, and that nothing had been done about that the first time, which was the reason why when it happened a second time in January of 2025, he took the information to the city manager rather than going back up the chain of command. It's important here not to be misleading or inaccurate. So before we even get to the substance of that claim, I want to make one point of clarification related to the word choice and syntax. Former Councilwoman Maddox claimed that I had repeatedly that I had stated, and Priscilla had stated, that Lee New repeatedly followed the chain of command. This is actually the audio from the city council session in March where I had presented, and it's not going to play. This is the part where the audio is probably not going to work. I'm going to try to play it. My guess is it won't. But you can go back to that presentation where I made it in March of 2023. I believe it was the voting session. I can't see the date on that, but March 24th, there it is. I'm sorry, I can see 23.3. March 24th, 2025. And I did not in fact say repeatedly, I said previously, that Lee New had previously raised that issue with his chain of command, not that he had repeated.
Sergeant New and others within the JPD had previously been aware of this tag expired, previously been aware of this tag expired tag in question. And in fact, Sergeant New himself had previously informed his chain of command that he had concerns regarding the expired tag.
Now, not to put too fine of a point on it, but the word previously means a thing that has happened before. The word repeatedly means a thing that has happened over and over again. Those are not synonyms. So substantively, why are we still talking about this? Again, this was a matter that was presented to the council in March of 2023. 4 months, 5 months later in July, 2025, I'm in the wrong year, it's been a long day. In July of 2025, we're still talking about it. Much ado has been made about this question of Lee New reporting this first incident to his chain of command in the summer of 2024. The only reference anywhere within the GBI interview summaries to that issue is found in Sergeant New's first interview with the GBI. That's the only reference anywhere within the GBI interview summaries. Notably, the GBI itself never followed up on this assertion, never sought to confirm it, or never sought to disprove it. And in my opinion, the reason for that is it's largely irrelevant to the questions being presented in the Lee New investigation. Whether Lee New was reporting that the JPD officer was driving on an expired tag for the very first time or the 101st time really does not change this analysis one way or another. But if we're going to go down that rabbit hole, it's important that we do it accurately. Again, this is from former Councilwoman Maddox's June 24th email, where she states she emailed each of Lee New's superior officers and asked the question, did Lee New make you aware of an expired tag? And former Councilwoman Maddox stated, all answered no. That highlighted portion is again not accurate. The email that she sent to former Assistant Chief Arwood and his response is highlighted where former Assistant Chief Arwood says, I do not remember Lee New ever telling me about another officer's tag being expired. Now, again, again, not to put too fine a point on it, I do not remember does not mean that thing did not happen. I do not remember does not mean never. But there are some people who very well did remember what happened in the summer of 2024. And to that end, we have the written statements of Officer Keith Robinson, the written statement of Officer Nick Hobbs, and the written statement of Officer David Graham. What did they have to say about this topic? Well, I'll start with Keith Robinson. He says in June or July of 2024, I became aware that Officer Nick Hobbs, one of the patrol officers on my shift, received a flop camera hit for an expired tag on a vehicle belonging to former Jefferson police officer Justin Stevens. Sergeant, now down to paragraph 4, Sergeant Lee New told me and other members of our shift that he was going to discuss Justin Stevens' expired tag issue with Assistant Chief James Arwood. A short time later, Sergeant Lee New told me and other members of our shift that he had in fact disclosed Stevens' expired tag issue with Assistant Chief Arwood, and that it was his understanding after the conversation with Arwood that the issue would be taken care of, or words to that effect. Officer Hobbs' written statement. Not long after this flop camera hit occurred, Officer Graham and I discussed what we learned with Sergeant Lee New, and Sergeant Lee New told us that in that conversation that he would discuss the matter with the Assistant Chief to resolve the problem. Within a week or two of this initial conversation, Sergeant Lee New told me that he had discussed Justin Stevens' expired tag issue with Assistant Chief Arwood, and that it was Sergeant New's understanding that it would be taken care of, or it would be handled appropriately. Finally, David Graham's statement goes even further and says not only did Sergeant New tell me that he was going to have this conversation with Assistant Chief Arwood, but that it was well known within the department that Sergeant New shared almost everything with Assistant Chief Arwood, even to the point that it became personally annoying that I stopped sharing things with Lee New because I knew they would all go back eventually to Assistant Chief Arwood. And in fact, this is another one of those instances related to Justin Stevens' expired tag in the summer of 2024. So, where does that leave us on this issue? Lee New says he discussed the first tag hit with Assistant Chief Arwood. Officers Robinson, Hobbs, and Graham all provide accounts around that time of the first tag incident that substantiates Lee New's version of events. That he said he was going to talk to Arwood about it, that he did talk to Arwood about it. Arwood himself does not say it didn't happen, only that he did not recall it. And I point you now, what motivation would Lee New possibly have had in the summer of 2024 to say he would have talked to Arwood about a tag issue when in fact he had not done so? It defies logic and common sense that he would make up such a thing unless there was some of the longest con in history being played, and we're saying it's a big setup, so when the flock camera hit happens a second time in January of 2025, we can say, oh, this is why I'm going to go to the city manager rather than up the chain of command. So finally, one closing point, and this one applied related to my presentation in March of this year. Much ado and much consternation has been made of my use of the term retribution. And former Councilwoman Maddox takes issue here with the use of that term, saying that nowhere within the GBI report was the use of the word retribution. And it is absolutely true that the word retribution is not used within the GBI interview summaries, keeping in mind that the GBI documents are summaries of interviews that were given. There were statements made by other people, not any sorts of conclusions that were necessarily made by the GBI up through the time of arrest. I spoke to the city council on March 24th for 8 minutes and 30 seconds. I timed it, I went back and timed it. And there were two statements over that 8 minutes and 30 seconds that I've had former Councilwoman Maddox take issue with. One, the one I just addressed, whether Lee New reported the first tag hit to the chain of command, and number two, this word retribution. Now, in that 8 minutes and 30 seconds, I was attempting to summarize to mayor and council approximately 100 pages of written material, interview notes and otherwise, and condense it into a readily understandable format. In order to accomplish that task, I certainly did make attempts to display the capacity for abstract thought and critical thinking in order to make certain logical deductions based upon the GBI material. The use of the word retribution is one such instance. I had a clip, I don't think it's pertinent for this, because what it was talking about is, it's important to understand what the word retribution actually means, and certainly as it's being used in my March 24th presentation. I pulled several different definitions from several different sources. So retribution is a punishment given to someone who has committed a crime as a way of paying back what they did wrong. Retribution is a justly deserved penalty. Retribution is punishment for a crime. Retribution is punishment inflicted, can't read it now, on someone as vengeance for a wrong or a criminal act. And my personal favorite, retribution is requital according to merits or deserts. So where do we get that from here? Well, you get it really directly from the interview summary of former Chief Worthman. We start out with the whole premise that the GBI was contacted by then Chief Joseph Worthman, and it was a request by him to investigate the possible misuse of GCIC information. The whole purpose of calling the GBI in the first place was to investigate possible criminal activity, and if crimes were found to have been committed, prosecute the offenders. Fact number two, when former Chief Worthman was interviewed by the GBI, he starts out with an airing of grievances not related to the tag information itself, but related to the vacant assistant chief's position and the city manager's role in that process. So Chief Worthman provides the following information, and we're starting right out of the gate. He advises that throughout the process, he's receiving negative feedback and pushback from the City of Jefferson City Manager, Priscilla Murphy. That's where we start the interview. Then, fact three, in his interview, he confirms that he told the city manager that it was illegal for her to have or access GCIC information. Fact four, and this one I think is critical, because Chief Worthman completely made up from nothing more than his own speculation that Sergeant Stevens' tag was run impermissibly and that the city manager had requested someone to impermissibly run the tag on her behalf. And we again note that his belief that it was illegal for Murphy to have the tag information in the first place. You can see that he was concerned that the tag had been impermissibly run at the request of Murphy. The actual undisputed facts coming out of the GBI investigation are that the tag was properly run after a flock camera hit and that the city manager never requested anyone to do it. So where does this lead us? Well, here's retribution means punishment for a crime, a justly deserved penalty, or requital according to merits or deserts. And what do we have in this case? Former Chief Worthman believed that a crime may have been committed. He believed that it was illegal for the city manager to view, possess, or distribute GCIC information. He believed that the city manager may have requested that the tag be illegally run, and he called the GBI to investigate and prosecute the crimes he believed may have been committed. Viewing these facts in conjunction, it does not seem to be a logical disconnect to conclude that Worthman believed the city manager had some involvement in possible criminal conduct. Moreover, the very purpose of calling the GBI was to seek prosecution, i.e. punishment, a just penalty, requital, and yes, retribution for the believed criminal conduct Worthman believed the city manager was involved in. None of the foregoing seems terribly surprising or even that noteworthy. If Worthman is upset at my use of the term, he and those who were carrying water for him must be necessarily applying a definition of retribution that aren't any of the ones that I have come across. Council, that was my PowerPoint presentation from the executive session on July 7th.